Tonight, is China losing control? The rare show of defiance spilling out onto the streets. Protesters furious over the country's zero-tolerance COVID policy, calling for change. 3 years of lockdowns and strict isolation protocols pushing people to their limits. Some even demanding President Xi step down. The demonstration's likely the largest public protest since Tiananmen Square. What the White House said about the growing movement late today. Here at home, Trump's dinner party disaster. The former president blasted after notorious white nationalist and rapper Kanye West made it to his Mar-a-Lago estate for dinner. How Trump is explaining the controversial guest list tonight. Catfish killer, an officer accused of murder, arson, and kidnapping after using a fake identity to talk to a teenage girl online. Why police are calling this tragic crime spree a wake-up call for parents everywhere. Holiday travel chaos, severe weather delaying thousands of flights on one of the busiest travel days of the year. Unruly passengers adding to the holiday headache, including an incident with NFL star Odell Beckham Jr. Another dangerous storm also taking aim at the south, bringing potentially deadly tornadoes. We'll time it out all for you. The border emergency, new video showing Mexican police in riot gear clearing out a migrant camp along the Rio Grande, pulling families out and destroying their tents, why officials claim their camp posed a danger. Plus the massive fire in Mystic, Connecticut, the famed marina, going up in flames. The investigation underway tonight. And Hawaiian volcano fears. The world's largest active volcano erupting for the first time in nearly 40 years. Bill Nye joins Top Story to explain the threat to the Big Island tonight. Top Story starts right now. And good evening. We begin Top Story tonight with a scene in China unlike almost anything we have witnessed in the 21st century. After nearly 3 years of harsh COVID lockdowns and strict isolation protocols, many people in China appear to be reaching a breaking point. Thousands taking to the streets to protest the country's zero COVID policy, zero COVID tolerance policy in cities across the nation. The demonstrations at times turning violent as police brutally crack down on the crowds. Some protesters boldly calling for President Xi to step down, others using a more subtle method to get around China's strict censorship laws. You see it here, simply holding blank sheets of white paper. The growing movement, possibly the largest public display of defiance against the Chinese government since the Tiananmen Square student protest in the 80s. The unrest within the world's second largest economy likely to ripple well beyond its borders. These protests at one of the largest Apple iPhone factories in the world last week already stoking fears of a supply chain meltdown. Wall Street taking notice today. Look at this, the Dow tumbling nearly 500 points. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer leads us off tonight here on Top Story.
Tonight, open defiance in cities across China. Protesters lashing out against zero COVID rules. Let's go together, she chants. The demand for freedom from the excesses of COVID controls, dragging cities to a standstill.
They're chanting for the end of lockdowns, for the end of mandatory testing, all of the zero COVID rules that have defined life here.
In Shanghai, some protesters even dared to shout for leader Xi Jinping to step down. The national outcry triggered by a fire in Xinjiang that killed 10 people trapped in their homes. Videos emerged of candlelight vigils for the victims that through the weekend grew into something else. No one is sure it can last. Today, police flooded cities like Wuhan and Hangzhou to quash more rallies. The rarity of it all getting the world's attention, potentially impacting supply chains during the holiday shopping season. Apple already announcing production of the iPhone 14 has suffered.
Freedom, freedom for China!
Small rallies of support have cropped up around the world. From Australia to Japan and the UK. Tonight, the White House weighing in. We've long said everyone has the right to peacefully protest, adding this includes the PRC, the People's Republic of China. The challenge for Xi Jinping now, quelling the unrest without walking back his own policy. With COVID cases in China at an all-time high, patience is wearing thin.
Janice joins Top Story tonight from Beijing. Janice, so much to talk about here. Do we expect to see any changes to China's strict zero COVID policy, the thing that's been triggering these protests?
Well, Tom, the government tried tweaking the rules recently, but since case numbers have been climbing, they're bearing down again with restrictions. Basically, in Beijing right now, it's like the early days of 2020. Schools and offices and stores are all closed, and the U.S. Embassy is telling Americans here to stock up on 14 days of food, medicine, and other supplies in case there is a harder lockdown.
And Janice, I have a two-part question now for you. Has the media, the local media in China, the state-run media, been reporting these protests at all? And I know that local protests, provincial protests, if you will, are not uncommon in China, but these big sort of countrywide protests are rare. Do we know if there's a concentrated effort to coordinate these protests among those demonstrators?
Well, so far, the government and state media have been largely silent about the protests. When foreign ministry officials were asked at a briefing, they didn't directly address this rising anger. Online criticism of the quarantines and lockdowns has been escalating too, and that is keeping censors very busy. Videos get pulled down pretty quickly, but there's this real cat and mouse game that has emerged online of organizers trying to post coded messages and these messages being shared among people. On your question about the scope of these protests, there are always protests in different parts of China, but what is extraordinary about what's been happening over the past few days is that these protests are happening simultaneously in multiple cities and people rallying around this single issue. So for all of the problems that zero COVID is posing in people's lives, it is this unifying common denominator. It's the one thing that people can agree on, that this policy has to change. Tom?
Janice Mackey-Freyer from Beijing tonight. Janice, we appreciate it. Now to the major fallout for former President Trump over a pre-Thanksgiving dinner with a known white nationalist and the rapper formerly known as Kanye West. The former president trying to distance himself from the dinner as the controversy grows. NBC News senior Capitol correspondent Garrett Haake has the latest.
Donald Trump facing growing backlash tonight to his dinner last week with prominent white nationalist Nick Fuentes at his private Mar-a-Lago club. Some of the strongest condemnation coming from his former vice president.
President Trump was wrong to give a white nationalist, an anti-Semite, and a Holocaust denier a seat at the table. And I think he should apologize.
Republican politicians and Jewish groups now among those calling out the former president.
This is something which degrades him, frankly, to do what he's done, and is something which diminishes the country as well. It's very unfortunate.
I mean, yes, it's appalling. Yes, it's unconscionable. And yes, it's entirely in character for Donald Trump.
The Holocaust-denying podcaster Fuentes arriving at Mar-a-Lago as a guest of rapper Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, himself engulfed in controversy for past anti-Semitic remarks. West describing their dinner with Mr. Trump in this since-deleted Twitter video.
So Trump is really impressed with Nick Fuentes. And Nick Fuentes, unlike so many of the lawyers and so many people that he was left with on his 2020 campaign.
In a series of social media posts, Mr. Trump denied knowing Fuentes and said he used the dinner to advise West to stay out of politics.
NBC News senior congressional correspondent Garrett Haake joins Top Story now. Garrett, do we know how someone like Fuentes just ended up at a dinner with the former president? We know there was a connection there with Kanye West. But I also have to ask this knowing that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, is Jewish.
Right. And Tom, look, the short answer here is he came with Kanye West, who's been friends with Donald Trump since before Donald Trump was president. The longer version here is this has always been a problem for Donald Trump, particularly since he's been in the White House. There's been very little effort, at least very little successful effort, to gatekeep around him and to keep people who could be considered politically dangerous or actually dangerous to his presidency or to his future in politics away from him. We saw this during the course of his presidency. We saw it especially post-election, sort of approaching January 6th, with just about anybody who knew somebody close to Trump able to get close to him. It has long been a problem for his supporters who want to try to direct the information that gets to him in a much more focused way than they've ever been able to successfully do during his time in public life.
All right, Garrett Haake for us. Garrett, we appreciate that. While some Republicans have spoken out against the former president's meeting, others, including the party's House and Senate leaders, have been noticeably silent. For more on the fallout, I want to bring in our panel tonight, Meredith McGraw. She's a national political correspondent for Politico, NBC News political analyst and former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo, and Rabbi Steve Ledier, senior rabbi of Wilshire Boulevard Temple and author. Meredith, I want to start with you first. What has the reaction been like in President Trump's inner circle? Has anyone really abandoned him that has stuck by him for all these years?
No, we haven't seen anybody abandon him. If anything, they think this is an unfortunate situation, but one that they've kind of found themselves in before. I was told by sources that this whole episode has forced people around Trump to reconsider how they're letting guests into Mar-a-Lago and how they're screening people that actually get to spend time with the former president. But look, we all know that Trump sort of does his own thing, and he was really eager to have this dinner with Kanye West, who, as Garrett pointed out in his package, has his own troubles with anti-Semitism. And the former president went ahead with having dinner with him, and Kanye West brought Nick Fuentes to that dinner, along with a former political advisor of Trump's, who he at first, in one statement, said he didn't know the people that he was with, and then later noted that it was somebody that he had a long-time relationship with.
You know, Rabbi, in the past, the former president has defended his actions in trying to reach out to people sometimes that he got criticized for, and saying that he wanted to sort of talk to them and try to understand them and maybe even help them change their ways. But here, it doesn't sound like the former president really apologized. What did you think of his statement afterwards?
I think he fails once again to say the three words that he should say and seem to be impossible for him to say. And those three words are, I was wrong. It's as simple as that. And I don't think most people realize who we're talking about here. Who is this guy, Nick Fuentes? This is a guy, and forgive me for reading, I want to get it exactly right. Let me give you three very quick quotes from this guy. One, I want this country to have Catholic media, Catholic Hollywood, Catholic government. I want this to be a Catholic-occupied government, not a Jewish-occupied government. So there we have that old trope of some kind of Jewish cabal. Next, during a taping of one of his shows, an audience member asked him, and I quote, "How do I deal with my wife getting out of line?" And here's what he said. "Why don't you give her a vicious and forceful backhanded slap with your knuckles right across her face, disrespectfully, and make it hurt? Just kidding, of course, just a joke. I would never lay a hand on a woman unless she had it coming." And finally, he compared the 6 million Jews stuffed into crematoria, including 1.5 million children, turned into ash and chimney smoke, and he equated it with cookies in an oven. That's who we're dealing with. That's who the president legitimized by having dinner with him.
So, Carlos, I gotta turn this next question to you. I mean, we're talking about clearly one sick puppy here. The president had this person in Mar-a-Lago. He had Kanye West, who has not apologized for his comments as well. And I also want to say this. I said this to Garrett, but it's the thing that shocks me the most is that the president's son-in-law is Jewish. This is just so surprising to me. My question to you, Carlos, is does anybody that is part of the MAGA movement, his base, do any of those voters care about this? Do any of them leave him?
Well, Tom, increasingly we're seeing that Republicans, a lot of rank and file, a lot of voters, not the leadership, as you said, but even a lot of members who are on the Sunday shows this weekend are starting to distance themselves from Donald Trump. There is this growing image, obviously, in the whole country, but particularly in the Republican Party, that Donald Trump is in disarray, that he's a weight on the Republican Party, that he's a major distraction. And you're starting to hear some of these Republicans, rank and file members, say, I disagree with Donald Trump. And look, they should say a lot more, but this is a big deal. Republicans have lived in fear of Donald Trump for years, of a Trump tweet, of a Trump-backed primary challenger. It's been fear all the time. And I think as Donald Trump continues to unravel, Republicans are starting to lose that fear. And a lot of Republican voters are starting to abandon Trump-backed candidates. We certainly saw that this primary season. So that hardcore that supports Donald Trump is going to stay with him. But he's losing people on the margins, and margins matter in American politics.
Do you think Senator Mitch McConnell and Representative McCarthy should come out and say something and condemn this?
Definitely. But both Senator McConnell and Leader McCarthy are dealing with instability in their respective caucuses, and particularly Kevin McCarthy needs to get to 218 votes to become Speaker. So there are still a lot of Trump supporters in the House Republican Conference, and McCarthy's going to be very careful not to anger any of those members before that early January vote on the House floor.
And Meredith, this next question to you, I mean, I have to assume now that both those leaders, as Carlos was setting up here, still live in fear of the former president. They're choosing politics maybe over what their conscience should be telling them to do.
I'm going to wait and see what McConnell has to say tomorrow. But, you know, certainly to Carlos's point about McCarthy, he really is trying to walk a tightrope here and keeping the House GOP together ahead of a speakership vote. And he's already offered, he's already tried to reach out to members of the GOP who are very much aligned with Trump. And so I think that's probably part of his own calculation.
Rabbi, is there any coming back for Kanye West at this point? I mean, obviously, he has lost all his businesses, but it seems like he's doubling down when it comes to anti-Semitism.
I don't think there is. And I want to remind everyone of what Menachem Begin said when he was Prime Minister of Israel, and he was asked what are the lessons of the Holocaust. And he said, lesson number one is if someone says they seek to destroy you, believe them. And so I believe that Kanye is the Jew hater that he seems to be. And I believe that of Fuentes as well. And I'm really ashamed of our former president,
are you worried about
who can't
your own
stand up and call it what it is.
Rabbi, are you worried about your own community? I mean, do you feel that this is, and I know maybe you live with this every single day, but do you feel like this is becoming, it's almost getting normalized?
It's getting normalized, legitimized, and we need to call it out for what it is. And by the way, it exists on the extreme right and it exists on the extreme left, and we need to call Jew hatred what it is. It's a hatred, it's racism, it's vile, it's toxic, and it harms all of us who care about the true moral compass of our nation. And yes, people die because of hate speech like this. They really do. It is got to stop, and there is no coming back for Kanye.
Carlos, finally, I'm getting flashbacks to 2016. I'm getting flashbacks to 2020, and yet the former president sort of survived all of that within the GOP. Do you see a scenario where the former president is the nominee of the Republican Party in 2024?
Well, Tom, unfortunately for Republicans, and I'd say the country, that is a possibility. If enough Republicans run and split up the field as they did in 2016, you could see Donald Trump winning some important states with 20, 25%, 30% of the vote. The question is, are Republicans going to organize to defeat Donald Trump? We know he's going to have challengers. Right here in Florida, there's a very prominent one in Governor Ron DeSantis who's preparing his next move. But the question is, will Republicans divide up the electorate in a way that will help Donald Trump be the nominee, or will they organize and collaborate to block him and to offer the country a different alternative in 2024?
Carlos, Meredith, Rabbi, we thank you so much for your time and your analysis on this story. We want to turn now to a disturbing story we've been following out of California. Police say a former Virginia state trooper catfished a teenage girl he met online. Then he drove across the country more than 2,000 miles to carry out a horrific crime spree targeting her and her family. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has the chilling details.
Tonight, neighbors in Riverside, California are grappling with shocking details, each more horrifying than the last. A burnt-out home, a teenager abducted, a law enforcement officer killed in a shootout, and 3 beloved community members dead.
I'm so sad and sick to my stomach that, this would even happen.
Police now say that 28-year-old Austin Lee Edwards, a former Virginia state trooper who'd most recently been working with the local sheriff's department, drove more than 2,000 miles to meet up with a teenage girl. Investigators say he'd obtained her personal information by deceiving her with a false identity online. That's known as catfishing.
What we do believe is, while he was contacting her online and digitally, that he was portraying to be a younger age, probably a teenager.
According to police, Edwards killed the girl's mother, Brooke Winnick, and grandparents Mark and Sherry Winnick, and set their home on fire. Then he fled the scene with the girl, who officials say appeared distressed. Sheriff's deputies tracked him down and shot him dead after he opened fire. The girl survived and is now in protective custody.
So this should clearly be a wake-up call for all parents. You basically, as a parent, want your voice to be in your teenager's head, reminding them to be safe and not give out personal, private information.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez joins us now in studio. Gabe, this is such a chilling story, especially for parents. Do we know what type of online profile this man created? And I think the thing that's so wild is that this is a man who was a state trooper, and he was working with a sheriff's department in Virginia.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tom. He resigned as a state trooper late last month, and he had just been hired by the sheriff's department. He was undergoing orientation to be part of the patrol division there. But the sheriff's department says that no previous employer had raised any red flags here. And as for what type of online presence he had, that's what investigators are trying to find out right now. They haven't said how long he and the teenage girl had been communicating, but that's something they're looking at.
Okay, Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, thank you. We turn now to the holiday travel nightmare plaguing travelers across the country. Airports seen pre-pandemic numbers of passengers and now severe weather and a string of bizarre incidents adding to the headaches. Here's NBC's Stephen Romo.
Tonight, it's the post-Thanksgiving holiday hangover that doesn't want to end. Millions of travelers who hit the road, rails, and skies still caught trying to get home.
We had 5 delays. Supposed to leave at 5, then it was 9, then it was 11, then 11:30, and then 12:30.
Today, more than 3,000 flights delayed and counting. Ripple effects from the 1-2 punch of severe weather and the number of travelers returning to pre-pandemic levels, the highest number since December 2019. In fact, Sunday saw more than 6,000 delays, including international flights, and 179 cancellations, according to FlightAware.
Flight's at 8 a.m., so we made sure that we left about 3 hours ahead of time.
Snow, rain, and heavy wind sweeping through major cities. But many travelers blaming airlines for a slew of other problems.
My bags was missing for 2-3 hours. They had no account for my bags. It was a disaster.
Some travelers face truly terrifying emergencies. Authorities removing this man from a JetBlue flight for allegedly brandishing a straight-edge razor blade on a woman sitting next to him.
For this period of I don't know how long it was, 30 minutes, everyone's just kind of in suspense at what's going to happen.
The suspect was removed from Saturday's New York to Salt Lake City, Utah flight and charged with assault.
He's like, just land the plane and everyone will be fine. I mean, she was kind of struggling, but he was grabbing her. What is his plan? What was he going to do? And I'm kind of in a state of shock.
Sunday saw another incident, this one involving NFL football star Odell Beckham Jr. The American Airlines flight crew saying they grew concerned right before takeoff when they discovered him unconscious and seriously ill.
Flight 212 responding to gate Delta 230, referencing unresponsive now.
Beckham Jr. was then escorted off his plane. His attorney says he was removed for not putting his seatbelt on when asked because he was asleep. The entire aircraft was deplaned. Beckham Jr. on Twitter calling the incident, quote, comedy hour, but those affected by the delay didn't see the humor, with one passenger tweeting, quote, forcing us off the plane because you were unresponsive and unruly is not comedy to the hundreds of folks trying to get home, dude. Not cool, man. As for those travelers that did choose to come home after the weekend, feeling pretty good about their planning.
It made sense. Look at the lines. There's no lines. There's no hustle and bustle. Everybody's going where they got to go. It made a lot of sense for us.
Okay, Stephen Romo joins us now live from LaGuardia tonight. So, Stephen, what are the travel experts saying about Christmas?
Well, primarily they're saying, Tom, book those flights as soon as possible because those prices will go up. But they say if you're willing to wait and gamble on hotels and rental cars, there could be deals closer to your travel dates. They also say book those flights for earlier in the morning. They are less likely to be delayed. Not sure about this one. They say actually try to travel on the day of. They say the roads and air likely to be less busy on those days, Tom.
Okay, Stephen, we thank you for that. I want to turn out to the forecast and the dangerous storm system threatening to hammer the South with severe weather. 16 million people from Texas to Kentucky in the path of potentially violent thunderstorms, damaging wind gusts, and long-track tornadoes. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns is tracking it all for us here in studio. And, Bill, I know you guys are gearing up for what could be a long 2 days.
Yeah, tomorrow night at this time on this show, you and I will be talking about what is developing and what has happened in our severe weather outbreak. We're pretty confident that's going to happen. Will it be a tornado outbreak or will it be a wind and hail outbreak? So we'll have to wait and see how this progresses. But this is the area of concern. When you see a weather map and it looks like it has a bullseye on it, you don't want to be in the middle of it. This is what we call a moderate risk of severe weather tomorrow. We're really going to see the threat area from central Louisiana northwards through much of Mississippi, east of Little Rock to the Memphis area, and then at night heading towards Nashville. And this area of red is at the greatest risk of tornadoes, not just tornadoes, but long track tornadoes. Those are tornadoes that are on the ground for a long period of time, and those are typically the most deadly time.
And Bill, you mentioned that we're going to be talking about this tomorrow night. Talk to me about those nighttime tornadoes, because those are the most dangerous.
Yeah, sun setting 4:30, 4:45, 5 o'clock. So what's different than the summer? We have a lot of storm chasers out there. Typically, we get tornadoes on the ground. Usually, the storm chasers can confirm it. They tell the National Weather Service. We get the weather out well in advance. When it's darker, obviously, we don't get the visual unless we get the lightning flashes with it. So after dark, we get less lead time, and that tends to be more deadly for the tornadoes and in the middle of tornado outbreaks. So the timing of all this tomorrow, we'll take this in through the night. Not much happens. I'll pause this at about 5 p.m. tomorrow. That's when it begins in Louisiana. And again, we'll track it through the show here tomorrow night.
All right, Bill Cairns for us. Bill, we appreciate it. We turn now to the Americas, where at the U.S.-Mexico border, clashes broke out over the weekend between Mexican authorities and Venezuelan migrants. Hundreds of migrants forced to leave their makeshift camps after authorities destroyed dozens of tents claiming safety concerns. Migrant families now left in limbo, stranded in Mexico after the U.S. limited the number of asylum claims last month. NBC's Valerie Castro has the details.
A tug of war at the U.S.-Mexico border between Venezuelan migrants and Mexican police. Smoke billowing from encampments as campfires lit to keep warm become a danger. There was a fire, this man says, as officers cleared tents with children inside. A lot of officers were rude to us, he added. U.S. Customs and Border Patrol officials say encounters with Venezuelan migrants at the border have more than tripled since last year, up 285%, and a more than 6,000% jump since 2020.
How tense are things at the border right now for these Venezuelan migrants that have made this arduous journey to get there?
There isn't always consistent or sufficient support services for them, especially for younger and for families that struggle to find shelter at times.
More than 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country, according to the UN, hoping to escape an oppressive political regime and economic crisis. But a change in U.S. policy restricting the number of asylum claims have left many stranded in Mexico, where they've set up camps. Over the last couple of weeks, clashes intensifying. In October, U.S. border officials say an agent was attacked with a flagpole during a demonstration near El Paso. Pepperball munitions were fired at the crowd, according to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, sending migrants running back to Mexico. As for the displacement this weekend, a humanitarian rights official with the Mexican government says the living conditions along the border are now a safety concern. A civil protection ruling behind the efforts to move the migrants, citing the risk of fire to flammable tents, concerns over children drowning in the river, and a risk of hypothermia. Camps were dismantled, mattresses thrown away, and families with children forced to move. But migrants say they're fighting to stay, hoping their visible presence makes more than a statement on both sides of the border.
Nosotros no nos queremos ir, ya que pues nosotros vemos un punto de vista que acá en este muro estamos haciendo un poco de presión a la gente de Estados Unidos para que nos puedan dejar ingresar.
What will determine what happens to these migrants, I think, is in part about policy, but also is in part about perception. And the Mexican government and the Mexico local towns, I think, are going to be big players in how this actually shapes up to be in the next coming months.
Valerie Castro joins us now live in studio here on Top Story. So, Valerie, you see that little boy, that family, and that mother that was forced out of their tent. You have to feel for them. Where do these migrants go now?
There's very few places they can go. They are bused to some nearby shelters, but the space there is limited. There's really not a lot of resources for them there at the border.
And basically, Mexico's calculation on this was that tent city was growing to be too dangerous. Okay. All right, Valerie, we thank you. Still ahead tonight, the murder mystery at the University at Idaho. Classes resuming 2 weeks after 4 students were murdered inside an off-campus house. We have the latest on the investigation. Plus, Marina Inferno, flames tearing through buildings and boats in Connecticut. What made this fire so destructive? And word of the year, can you guess the word that was searched the most in 2022? We have that list from the dictionary. Stay with us. We're back now with that murder mystery at the University of Idaho. It's been more than 2 weeks since 4 students were stabbed to death in a house just blocks from campus, and still no arrest or even suspects. Classes resuming there today, but the campus quiet, with many students choosing not to return for in-person learning with a killer on the loose. The school letting students finish their semester remotely if they choose. And tonight, authorities say they've processed more than 1,000 tips and are still going through hundreds of pieces of digital evidence to try and crack this case. I want to bring in retired ATF special agent in charge and NBC News contributor Jim Kavanaugh to walk us through some more. Jim, I guess what's troubling to so many people is not a single suspect has been arrested, not even a sketch, nothing out there for the public to help police. I understand they're receiving tips, but has the amount of time that's lapsed in this murder investigation concerned you?
Yes, Tom, I think overall they're doing a good job. You know, they've assembled an A team.
Jim, hold on, Jim, how can you say that, though? How can you say they're doing a good job? I'm just curious. I'm not trying to be abrasive here, but that stands out to me as sort of a strange comment, considering it's been so long.
Well, I was just going to tell you about the first part, the good part, and then I was going to tell you about what I think is the bad part. So the good part, I think, is they've assembled a team, the state troopers, the FBI, and the local detectives. They've put that team together. They have enough resources. They have the behavior analysis unit in there from Quantico at FBI. So from that standpoint of the case, I think they've done a good job. But I don't think they've done a good job communicating with the public enough, Tom, to your point, to be able to leverage the information that they need to capture the killer. For example, if I was a commander on this case, I'd want to be putting out to the public as much as I can what could be the possible signs of post-offense behavior of the killer, and maybe even some pre-offense behavior of the killer. In other words, the morning after the murders, did someone who works with you not show up for work? Did they leave town all of a sudden? Did you notice some different strange behavior on their part? Were they unusually quiet or withdrawn? Whatever the signs that the investigators think might be there, they should be leveraging that with the public to bring those tips in. You know, they say they have no suspects. I'd say that's not true. Having been on so many of these cases, in charge in so many, there's always names that come up. You know, the public calls in, Billy did it, Joey did it, Louis did it, and you have to sort through those. There's no viable suspect. There's no suspect with probable cause, certainly. But they've had a lot of names cross their desks that I'm sure they have been evaluating.
Jim, how hard is it when a high-profile crime like this comes to an area that doesn't get a lot of crime, that doesn't have a lot of murders like this, especially a quadruple murder where you have the national media putting a spotlight on it? It involves a college as well, college students. I just wonder if good cops are good cops everywhere, or if investigators who don't have that much experience dealing with these sort of high-profile crimes may be at a disadvantage in this case.
Well, I think they are initially at a disadvantage. There hasn't been a murder in this town in about 7 years. So, you know, if the homicide detective of the Moscow PD is left with a case like this on its own, that would be not good. But they have state troopers and they have FBI and they have a whole lot of forensic and laboratory specialists. They have the horses to get the job done. But what they've got to do in a case like this is broaden that out and leverage the public. Just the cops is not enough. You have to have the community, everybody in the region, and the cops versus the killer. That's the way you got to leverage it. And when you hold on to every piece of information so tight, you never can. You got to hold on to a few things. You got to have a few things you never let out. We all know that in a big case. But you got to let out more. You got to get the public on your side. This is one of the most vicious killers in America right now who's loose in Idaho.
Jim, you think this killer's
somewhere in the region.
Jim, you think this killer's going to kill again?
I think there's a good chance, certainly a good chance. I mean, he's tasted the blood. He has 4 deaths. He's feeling pretty powerful as each day goes by where he is not captured. Now, he may lay low a while if he's local in the community, but we don't know. He could live hours from there. We don't really have a line on him. And if it's possible that he did not even bring a cell phone to the crime and they may not be able to get a digital picture of him, Tom, you know, at the scene or in the cell tower capture or in the Wi-Fi in the local building, this guy could be very strategic and cunning and calculating. And so he might have gone in there with no digital signature, which will make it even harder for the officers. You know, have to roll back to the way we used to do things years ago, because now we count so much on these digital footprints to track fugitives and killers.
Okay, Jim Kavanaugh for Top Story tonight. Jim, we appreciate your analysis. When we come back, a consumer alert. Thousands of sippy cups recalled over the risk of lead poisoning. What parents need to know. And NBC's chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons, back from Moscow and here at Top Story in the flesh. The major shift he's seen in Russia, nearly a year into this conflict in Ukraine. Stay with us. Okay, back now with Top Story's news feed, and we begin with new details in the mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket. Today, the 19-year-old suspect pleading guilty to domestic terrorism, 10 counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder. He killed 10 people during that hate-fueled attack at a Tops grocery store back in May. The charges come with a mandatory life sentence without the chance of parole. An investigation tonight into a fire that destroyed a popular New England marina. Video shows the wind-driven flames tearing through multiple buildings and several boats in Mystic, Connecticut. The fire also causing propane tank explosions and downing power lines. At least one firefighter was hurt. No word yet on the cause. A consumer alert tonight specifically for parents of toddlers. Toddler cups have been recalled due to a risk of lead poisoning. The self-described natural baby product company Green Sprouts is recalling over 10,000 stainless steel sippy cups, straw bottles, and sip and straw cups. According to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, the base of these cups can break off and expose a piece of metal that contains lead. And Merriam-Webster unveiling their word of the year. Gaslighting, defined as the act or practice of grossly misleading someone, especially for one's own advantage. The dictionary says searches for the word on their website increased more than 1,700% in 2022 alone. The other words with the most hits: oligarch, following the war in Ukraine, Omicron, and codify, which was fueled by the overturning of Roe v. Wade in June. Okay, heading overseas now into the Men's World Cup. Upsets and controversies dominating the tournament after 2 rounds of matches. And the U.S. Soccer Federation now embroiled in a controversy after briefly scrubbing the emblem from the Iran flag in a tweet. For the latest on this headline, we're joined by NBC News' Megan Fitzgerald. Megan, good evening.
Tom, the Iranian government is upset. They feel disrespected that the U.S. Soccer Federation would remove their emblem from their national flag. And so what we're seeing is that the Iranian government is taking to Twitter, calling on FIFA to put some consequences in place, to suspend Team USA from 10 games, to kick them out of the World Cup. Now, keep in mind, the U.S. Soccer Federation says they did this because they were trying to stand in solidarity with the women of Iran who are fighting for basic human rights. We did reach out to FIFA for a comment, and we've not heard back. But also today, at a press conference, an Iranian reporter asked Tyler Adams, a midfielder for Team USA, how he feels about representing the U.S. with so much discrimination against black people. Then Adams responded by saying there's discrimination everywhere you go and that the U.S. is making progress every day. But look, you know, there's a lot that's going on here, a lot that's going on off the pitch and a lot that's going on the pitch. And as we've been talking about, this is such an unexpected tournament. Morocco, for example, beating Belgium 2-0. Morocco ranked 22nd in the world. Belgium ranked 2nd. Costa Rica besting Japan. Argentina beating Mexico after losing to Saudi Arabia in that shocking upset. Brazil beating Switzerland today, securing their spot in the next tournament, in the next round of this tournament. And, you know, Team USA is hoping to do the same when they take on Iran tomorrow night. If they win that match, they will advance to the knockout round. So all eyes, Tom, are going to be on that game tomorrow night.
Megan, we thank you for that. Now to Top Stories Global Watch and the search for survivors in Italy after heavy rains triggering a deadly landslide on the island of Ischia. New video shows the aftermath, buildings destroyed and vehicles trapped in mud. At least 8 people have been found dead, including a newborn baby. Experts say illegal buildings partly caused the disaster and that the island is still at risk for more landslides. And international police say they have busted a so-called super cartel believed to control a third of the cocaine trade in Europe. The police agency releasing new video showing agents discovering luxury cars, motorcycles, and stashes of cash. Authorities say they seized 30 tons of drugs and arrested nearly 50 suspects across 6 different countries. Okay, we want to turn now to some exclusive footage inside of Moscow. NBC's Keir Simmons sitting down with a group of Russian students discussing their opposition to Putin and the growing divide in Russia as the conflict in Ukraine rages on. Plus, why those close to Putin believe it's too late to change course.
Tonight, the Ukraine conflict is tearing at the fabric of Russian society. In Moscow, we sat down with 5 students who didn't want to show their faces so they could speak freely.
I think the majority of my generation wants this to end, and we want to live in peace.
Live in peace?
Yes.
While it's impossible to measure overall support for the conflict, these students say many friends are despondent, families divided.
I'm really sorry for the entire younger generation, because the amount of struggles they have to face will be just incredible. The attitude towards Russians is basically ruined.
You have arguments with people, do you?
Yes, all of the time, especially...
Arguing all the time?
Yes, especially with my family.
With your own family?
Yes, some people from my family also support that war. They think that we, a younger generation who don't understand anything.
Divisions that 9 months after President Putin's invasion are visible even on state TV. Here, a hardline talk show host fights with a lawmaker over whether the Ukraine campaign is justified, unheard of just a few months ago. But President Putin, appearing with bereaved mothers, trying to reassure them their sons did not die in vain. Russia's former deputy foreign minister tells me those around President Putin think there's no turning back now.
As many people in Russia are saying, the defeat of Russia, the defeat of Putin means the crash of the whole system.
The students we spoke to also fear for Russia's future.
If we don't have the internet, we become like North Korea.
Vladimirovich Putin. With protesters purged, they too believe President Putin will begin 2023 with a firm grip on power.
I want you to put up your hand, if you believe anytime soon people will go into the streets in huge numbers to try and change things. It's not going to happen.
Keir Simmons joins Top Story in studio here with us. So, Keir, that last scene there was so telling.
Yeah.
Nobody raising their hand. But you do see it in the state media, though, how the tone has changed. We were talking about this in my office earlier today. That's really surprised you.
It really has. When I was in Russia, when the invasion first happened, there was just unequivocal support, a wave of support on Russian television. Now you see open criticism. That is a real change, Tom. I guess, in a sense, you could say it was inevitable, because how can you not notice how things have gone in this conflict with Ukraine for Russia, for President Putin? But it is a change, and I think it is significant. I think this will be a long, hard winter, not just for Europe, but also for the Russian leader.
What do you think the turning point has been? Was it the Putin draft that you reported on? Was it just the length of this war, not as Putin has advertised, or that Russia has sort of been embarrassed on the stage when it comes to military tactics?
I think the Putin draft is a big deal, no question. Even if you are watching Russian public television in a rural village somewhere in that huge country that is Russia, think about it, 11 time zones. We forget how enormous it is. Even if you are doing that, if your son or husband is sent to Ukraine, and then if they don't come back, you cannot help but be impacted by that. If they're called up when they didn't want to fight, again, it has a real impact, a profound impact. And that is one of the things that is dividing the country, with younger men who don't want to fight fleeing the country if they can, and others going to fight. So, another thing with these students that I spoke to, which I think people will really recognise, is this idea of divided families, arguments within families caused by the Ukraine conflict. That is something that I think everybody can see and know, recognise for themselves in their own society.
At the beginning of this war, and you pointed this out, there was that sort of rah in Russia. And I remember with the athletes showing the V symbol as well. Do the people in Russia, the people you've been speaking to over the past year, do they feel sympathy for the Ukrainians? I mean, these are their neighbors. In some cases, they're their family members. That's right. And they share a border with them.
Yeah, there are families that are divided. I talked about divided families. Yeah. There are families that are divided by this. No question there are people who have huge sympathy. In some ways, an argument can be from some to say, I sympathise with them, but I still agree with President Putin. There is deep support for President Putin in Russia still. This is a marathon, and that's really what President Putin wants. In a sense, it's a marathon, a race, if you like, between liberal democracies and Russia to see whether the tensions that we are beginning to see, for example, in Europe over this, inevitably, even between Europe and America, whether those tensions split the alliance before what's happening in Ukraine divides Russia even further than it already clearly is, honestly.
Yeah, we're going to have to wait and see. I think you're right. The winter's going to be a big turning point as well. Keir Simmons, great to have you in the flesh, in studio. Always great to have you, man. Okay, coming up, volcano warnings. The world's largest active volcano in Hawaii, erupting for the first time in decades. The one and only Bill Nye the Science Guy joins Top Story next for more on what this means for residents nearby. Stay with us. All right, we are back now here on Top Story with the world's largest active volcano. This is a time lapse. Take a look at that. Erupting for the first time in nearly 40 years. Lava now flowing from the summit of Mauna Loa, which makes up half of the big island of Hawaii. Hawaiian officials saying the volcano doesn't pose a threat to communities just yet, but the situation could change quickly. And we are thrilled tonight to be joined by the one and only Bill Nye the Science Guy, who's going to walk us through what's happening. Bill, I guess the first question is, I want to start from the get-go. What is the Earth telling us when a volcano like this erupts? Is there anything we should be reading as this volcano is erupting over Hawaii?
Well, there are hundreds of volcanoes around the world. Most of them are underwater. And the Hawaiian Islands, if the big island of Hawaii were above ground, it would be the tallest mountain in the world, and other amazing facts like that. But in my parents' lifetime, it was discovered that the surface of the Earth is made of these tectonic plates that are moving around. It was speculated in the 19th century, but it was proven in the middle of the 20th century, and these plates move around. And at the plate boundaries, like we have here in California, the plate folds and you get a string of volcanoes running from South America to the Arctic Circle. But in Hawaii, you have the Pacific plate, this huge tectonic plate moving to the north and west. And it's going over a hot spot in the Earth's mantle, the bendable hot rock that's underneath the surface where we live. And then once in a while it melts through. And that's what created the Hawaiian Islands. And this Mauna Loa volcano is erupting again. And in geologic terms, everybody, 35, 40 years is nothing. So it happens regularly. And people in Hawaii, at least when I visited there, are very aware of it. And they, pun intended, roll with it.
Is there a danger there, though? I know the population in that area has increased significantly. Do you think at some point they're going to order evacuations? At some point they're going to say, I think this is going to be a little dangerous for the people that are living there?
I think it absolutely, without question, depends. It depends on what happens with this thing. You know, people watch it very carefully. And to get all arms akimbo on you as a science educator, there was a move, getting to be 15 years ago, to close the volcano observatory, arguing that volcanoes don't erupt very often, and there's no volcanoes in the United States, and don't worry about it. Everybody, the United States is lousy with volcanoes in the sense that we have this string of mountains, and so we're all here because of volcanoes.
Bill, thank you for that. We appreciate it. That was incredible. We learned a lot there. Yeah, we learned a lot there.
It's part of living on the Earth, and we got to roll with it. And
we watch it, we'll respect it. Yeah, we'll keep following it here in Top Story. Bill, love having you on. Thank you so much. When we come back, the holiday weekend miracle, the first responders racing to save a woman trapped inside a burning car. But when they got there, she had already been saved. The off-duty firefighter who risked his own life to pull her from the flames. That's next. Finally tonight, the heroic rescue caught on camera. A man running towards a burning car and saving the driver's life, proving that even on a holiday weekend, a first responder is never off duty. Savannah Sellers has this story.
It was just after 3 in the morning when first responders arrived at this vehicle fire in Brookfield, Connecticut.
P1 to Brookfield, cars in fully in flame.
Roger, fully engulfed.
Dispatchers alerting them an occupant of the car was still trapped inside. But when Brookfield volunteer firefighters arrived on scene...
Command all units. There's no one in the car. Occupant was removed by bystanders.
That bystander caught on dash cam video pulling the female driver to safety.
I was the first firefighter on scene from Brookfield, and there was no way that the victim would have survived had he not done what he done. There's no doubt in my mind.
Turns out the man whose bravery and quick thinking likely saved that woman's life was an off-duty firefighter.
Instinct training kicked in and ran in and did the best that I can do to get her out.
Nicholas Perry was driving home from his shift with the White Plains Fire Department when he saw the engulfed vehicle.
So I assessed how she was in there. Then I broke the front passenger window, and I was able to get one of her legs free, and the other one was pretty mangled, was giving me a hard time. I was just yelling to her, so listen, you have to work with me because we're running out of time here.
With no fire protective gear, Nicholas battled the flames that burned his jacket, doing everything he could to help get that driver out of the car.
Miraculously, her leg came out, and whoop, one motion pulled her right out through the passenger window, and I dragged her up to the closer to the roadway.
This firefighter thankful this holiday weekend to be at the right place at the right time to save a life off the clock.
Like really that's really just happened, but you know, it was a good outcome, and I mean she's alive, and that's it.
We thank Savannah for that story, and we thank you for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.